and then we will thank you very much, Marcia. And then we will go on with the question and answer section. I'm not sure if we've made a list of all the questions being asked as Professor Devnish was speaking, so I suppose what we could do is scroll to the top of the conversation, if that's okay.
I did.
Oh, you have? Oh, thank you so much, Marcia. You see, I have the best team. You see that? You see that? The best team. Well, thank you so much for that, Marcia. So Marcia has been, and I think Stacey have been making some notes. So what I would do is I would ask them to read out the question that has been asked. I can see so got their hand up as well. So if Marcia or Stacey could please just read out the first question that our audience members have asked, and then we could please ask Professor Devenish to very kindly respond to that question. Is Professor Devenish still here with us? Hopefully.
Yeah, oh, let's unmute.
Is he still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Professor. Are you just to confirm, are you okay with recording? Is that okay?
I'm fine. I'm okay. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to have our first question, please. If we could read out the first question, and then if
so, the first one that I have is, would you please, Professor Devenish, elaborate on the connection between the Nigerian Yoruba language and the Cuban Lukumi?
Which, of course, is somewhat outside of my research competence, and so what I do know is that the person who wrote a lot of that is somebody called Lydia Cabrera, and yes, the research shows that the Lukumi is in fact a variety of Yoruba, and it does occur in the ceremonies and so on. And the stuff I remember reading was that in fact Lukumi was being taught to inductees into the into Santeria, right, or Orisha religion in Cuba, and that they actually wrote it down in some kind of Spanish script and used that to teach each other the language. So the answer is, without claiming any heavy expertise on it, that there is a connection, that the language was transmitted, that as far as I know, though, it doesn't survive as a conversational mode, you know, the kind of thing people would use regularly in conversation, but it survives in Santeria stroke Orisha religious practices. That's as much as my limited knowledge goes.
I have another question. It's, how have these languages continued to develop into the 21st century? What would you say is their future, in particular for the Caribbean islands?
Well, the future, because in the 1960s, in fact, most of the linguistic scholars felt that they had to run around the region and record these languages because they were going to die out. And they said, oh, you know, with education and enlightenment and migration, these languages were going to die. Well, they did exactly the opposite. And these languages became languages that exploited the new mediums of cultural expression, global expression, particularly music. So that the Dominican French Creole, for example, ended up becoming dominant in cadence music in the 1970s. And then growing out of that, you've got in Dominica the World Creole Music Festival and that kind of thing. So suddenly, these languages, which were supposedly about old people in the country and bush and backward and so on, were projected into mass popular culture. That happened for French Creole and more so for the English lexicon Creoles, in particular Jamaican. So Jamaican dominates the world of popular culture, that arguably, after African American English, Jamaican is probably the most global and broadly used and highly prestigious language of international popular culture, right? So these languages are not fading away and going anywhere. They have a lot of cultural power. The problem is that the people who are producing the culture are nevertheless discriminated against and marginalized in their countries of origin. So nothing backward about these languages. In fact, they have inserted themselves in every area. In the migration situation, as a colleague of mine was saying to me yesterday, it's weird. Jamaicans in Toronto, in Canada, make up a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of the population of Toronto. And yet, Toronto street speech and slang is dominated by Jamaican speech. So that really says that this it's not about your numbers, it's about the cultural power. And the cultural power of the West of the Caribbean has always been great because it is we that build capitalism. So we don't need to kind of be shy about it, that every form of the accumulation, the wealth that was accumulated in the sugar plantations is what built the factories in Europe. In fact, the first factories were in the Caribbean, the sugar factories. And we built the stuff that they have there. So we have always been at the center of the world. Our languages have always been at the center of the world. The only people who think otherwise are us. And that's the internal thing is what needs to be addressed. So there's great future because, in fact, we've always played from the time of the meeting of the continents, we were the center. We generated the wealth, we generated the culture, and we generated the languages that made this thing happen. And therefore, there is as much future in our languages as there is a past.
Thank you, Professor. There's a question that's just been asked that's similar to one asked earlier. I don't know if it's the same person, but is there a difference between the use of the term Creole and Patois to describe the dialect or language of the colonies?
The term Creole is a linguist term that refers to a language that grows out of contact between two or more other languages and eventually becomes a language of the community and one that the new community identifies with. What people call it, in a sense, is your business. You could call it anything you like, right? The word dialect in English, and I'm now speaking as a linguist, simply refers to a form of a language. It could be regional or it could be social class. So that standard British English, Southeastern British English, is a dialect of English, just as Cockney or Yorkshire, who have you. So linguists don't use the term dialect to refer to some kind of low status, a form of language. Thirdly, if you take the position that Creole is not a form of English, it ain't a dialect of English, it's a different language. And therefore, you can then look for your labels. The label that in the Jamaican context was preferred is Jamaican, in following the principle that languages become associated with the countries where they are used. So in the same sense that English is from England, and Swedish from Sweden, and Finnish, and so on and so forth, then Jamaican is from Jamaica. And that's the option that was used when for example, the New Testament of the Bible was translated 8 years ago into Jamaica. It became the Jamaican language New Testament, right? Not Jamaican Patois or even Jamaican Creole New Testament. And that was because it was important to label and link the language with the national entity that the language was associated with. So the issue is not about what we call it. It's the politics of naming. That we, in each situation, it's different in each situation, I should point out, because it wouldn't be as easy to refer to Guyanese Creole as Guyanese. Why? Because Guyana has 9 indigenous languages, and to say Guyanese would be to exclude those. So the Guyanese, are the recommendations certainly I have made in relation to Guyanese, is to go for the popular term that we have for the language Creolese. So each situation, the decision making is different. There's been an argument in the case of Haiti, where some people have said they want to call the language Haitian, but the vast majority of people call it Creole, and the Constitution lists French and Creole. The actual Constitution says Creole is the language that unites all Haitians, and Creole and French are the official languages of the Republic. That's how they do it. So the naming thing has to be addressed in each case by each set of people. So these are separate languages, but what you call them has to be left up to the people. So, for example, papiamento literally means speaking. Papia is a word to talk. So papiamento is simply speaking. But they choose to call their language that. That's fine. it's just what term you use that makes or gets over the message about the languageness of your language and its importance to you, and how you want it to be viewed by the world.
Right. Okay, so what are your favorite French Creole books, and which of those would you recommend? And the follow-up question to that is, when is your next work coming out?
The thing about this is what I would say is that there is a book. There's a book called by Jacques Roumain, Haitian writer. He's actually a Haitian communist as well, called Les Gouverneurs de la Rosée. I think it's translated into English as the governors of the Dew, DEW, or I think the commanders of the Dew. But it's really about a Haitian who goes to work in the Dominican Republic, I think, on sugar plantation, and then comes back to Haiti and transforms the community. But in the process of doing that, of course, runs into some problems and so on. But that one, it's written in French, but it was written in a French that was really intended to be in Creole. And I'm going to find out whether at any point a translation of that as the original Haitian peasant novel, whether in fact that translation into Creole has taken place. It's just occurred to me that that is probably a priority. So I would answer that that is my favorite almost French Creole novel. Right. And the other question was what? Well, the thing is that when is my next book coming out? Well, one actually did come out 2 months ago. I am totally bad at book titles and so on. But if you give me a minute, I can actually grab it because I don't even remember the name. Hold on. Okay, all right. It's this one, right? And it's I don't know if people could see it, but anyway, but it's if I can see it, is Language, Race, and the Global Jamaica, and it's co-authored by myself and Karen Carpenter, and it's the publishers, I think, Macmillan, Palgrave Macmillan, British publisher, and that came out 2 months ago, and that one really contains some of the points that I am making about the fact that the Jamaican language is global, and that it tied to its music and the global projection of even physical features and so on and so forth. It is the concept that Jamaica has that it is unimportant is really belied by the realities, and that the language is at the center of Jamaica's global projection. So that's what this book, in a way, some of what I was saying is really from the book. And the book also stresses the importance historically of Jamaica and the British Caribbean, in a sense, as the center of the growth of globalization and global capitalism. We made it. Our languages made it. And we need to think about our languages as important and as, in fact, global. Okay. So.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up from there? There's a question in the box here. What role do you think education departments in the Caribbean should play in promoting the use of native language in schools, considering the importance of global access today?
I always laugh with the last bit, considering the role of global access, as if to promote the use of indigenous and local languages is antithetical to global access. It's exactly the opposite. You can't be somebody else if you're not you. You can't talk somebody else's language if you don't speak and can't function effectively and don't understand the world properly through your language, if you're not educated through your language. But of course, again, we fall into this thing of, oh dear, we are unimportant. We got to be global. We got to learn English. And in so doing, but even that, to learn, for the mass of the population to learn English or French, the mass of the population has to be educated in its native language. So the considering the global aspect, I'm saying we will never be able to make our majority populations globally effective without full and complete education in their native languages. It is only on a basis of you being fully and properly educated in your native language that you can learn foreign languages and move on. But unfortunately, we operate within the Anglo-Saxon paradigm of one head, one language. In other words, the only people who talk one language is English people and probably white Americans. Nobody else does. So why the assumption that being involved and engaged in education in your own language precludes you from learning 2 or 3 or 4 other languages? Everybody else does it. So that's it.
I have a question here. If possible, could you generally refer to linguistic and extra-linguistic effects on Creoles that moved from a country where they coexisted with their lexifier language to a territory with a different dominant language? For example, most Central American Creoles.
Okay, because what would happen, but in Central America, you've got a whole series of English lexicon Creoles, right? And depending on if it's in Costa Rica, obviously the coexisting language is Spanish. And I know that in Limon, there's a huge struggle and fight related to language loss. The same is true for Colombia in relation to San Andres and Providence Island, where Creole, particularly in San Andres, which is an island off the coast of Nicaragua, the one that belongs to Colombia. And in San Andres, the island population, what they call the Raizal population is in fact feeling under threat. There are 50,000 and the Hispanic population surrounding them is about 60, 70,000. And Creole has become the core of their resistance against outside domination. And it's a resistance which transcends race in the sense that they are Black Colombians who are Hispanic. They see themselves as different Creole, English Creole speaking Colombians in San Andres are fighting for their land, for their rights, and for their identity, and they're doing so through language.
Okay, a number of questions relating to, sorry, let me find it. A number of people have asked this question in different ways, but would you explain whether and how Caribbean languages have historically influenced African languages? I think you touched a little bit.
Okay, that was pretty easy. That because of the specifically and particularly the or deportation of the Trelawney Maroons who had rebelled in 1796, and their deportation to, first of all, Nova Scotia and then to Sierra Leone. What developed there was Sierra Leone Creole. KRIO is what it's described as, and Creole is very, very similar to the Caribbean Creole languages, right? So you hear it, you kind of say, yeah, you know it. But it's an offshoot of Western Jamaican Creole. But as I was explaining, then subsequently, Creole, which now is a Creole spoken in West Africa, ended up now being spread along the West African coast, because these same people around Freetown in Sierra Leone were used by the British as their foot soldiers in southern Nigeria as they expanded. And in fact, so that they in fact, as far as as far as Equatorial Guinea, in Equatorial Guinea, there's a language called Pichi, which is really a dialect or a variety of Sierra Leone Creole. And in addition, in between those two, you've got the expansion via Ghana, southern Nigeria, and all of those produced the lingua franca. So that in Nigeria, the language that most Nigerians across language boundaries use to communicate with each other is Sierra Leone. Is Nigerian Pidgin English or Pidgin or Niger as they call it. But it is in fact a language which owes its origin indirectly to Caribbean influence, and it's sufficiently important that it is now clashing with Jamaican because with Afrobeat music that is integrating with dancehall, the two language varieties are mixing in all kinds of interesting and different ways. So we are back to the idea that we need to be talking about a kind of Black Atlantic concept rather than Caribbean, Africa, Europe, because we are part of a cultural complex that was created by these people crossing the oceans. And once they created that, the Caribbean has very much been at the center, and it influences both what happens in the North and what happens in West Africa and in Africa generally. Yep.
Beverly has asked, she's saying that she's teaching her daughter Jamaican patois and proverbs. In education, we refer to Jamaican patois when working with pupils. Should this be used interchangeably with the word Creole? She says Louise Bennett uses the word patois and Jamaican lavrish. I don't want to mispronounce that. So I guess the question is, should this be used interchangeably with the word Creole?
It's not what it should be, it is what. I know that outsiders, if you're an outsider, your questions, you want to be right. All I can tell you is that the language activists, the people who are promoting the language, label it Jamaican. Miss Lou is dead. Miss Lou was talking and operating in a context that is 30 and 40 years old. She did what she had to do and presented the language, as I was explaining to you, as a heritage language. It's something that Jamaicans need to hold on to in order to hold on to their identity. We're in a different ballgame right now. Jamaican is a global language, right? It's got a kind of respect and prominence that didn't exist in Miss Lou's time. And Jamaicans at home are talking about and believe that the language should be an official language, which would not have been the case when Miss Lou was around. So Miss Lou could say whatever she wants, and whatever she said may have been appropriate at the time in discussing what is happening. All I can say is what is happening now is, as I describe it, and if you ask me to recommend a label for the language, I would go with the one that is used by the Jamaican Language Unit, the body that has been set up to promote the Jamaican language. And that's why it's called the Jamaican Language Unit and not the Patois Language Unit, because the label that we, the activists, are going with is Jamaican. We respect Miss Lou and we support her and we think she was great, etc., etc. But the labeling of the language has got to do with what we want to do right now going forward.
I have another question here. Can you talk a little bit on how Jamaican Creole or Patois has influenced Toronto and London slang in particular, especially considering the lack of standardization causing Jamaican native speakers to think they are speaking English and thus forcing native English speakers abroad to adjust?
Well, I don't know if it's a lack of standardization or anything that forced them to think that they were speaking English. I think that Jamaicans simply spoke their language, and that relative to perhaps other Caribbean Creole speakers, they were more self-confident. They came from a different social background, because this is the other complicating thing. In the case of the UK, the displacement of the peasantry caused by bauxite mining, where the peasantry were given money for their land, and they used that to migrate to the UK, which meant that large numbers of rural people, many of them illiterate and so on, arrive in an advanced industrial country. And they didn't have all the why, they just did what they had to do. And they were not educated enough to make adjustments. And it probably is also the case they were sufficiently self-confident that they demanded the kind of respect that more middle-class migrants from, say, for example, Guyana. My primary school teacher migrated to the UK. He is going to behave linguistically and quite differently to a rural, uneducated, and possibly illiterate person arriving in London. So you had those differences. And so in the end, for a variety of reasons, the Jamaicans dominated the Caribbean, as well. The Jamaicans were more numerous, 60% of the migrant population to the UK from the Caribbean. They dominated the interactions, and in the end, because of the what I would call the cultural capital that they carried, they dominated popular culture. So that by the 60s, even the skinheads who were fascist and anti-black and so on, the skinheads were identifying themselves through ska music. So here is it, anti-immigrant, anti-black, and youth cultural group using as its calling music and calling an identificational thing. It's flag, musical flag, for the want of a better word, ska. So it happened, the Caribbean and in particular Jamaica dominated the migrant space, but they also dominated popular culture. And as a result, we have what we have. It isn't because of anything other than that cultural capital. What I should say, though, is that there have been changes. So that a colleague of mine and myself, we're collecting what we call Black Britishisms that we know is definitely not Jamaica, right? So to pluralize in Jamaican or in any Caribbean English Creole, you can only pluralize when the noun is definite. So you talk about the man, them, the woman, them, the two man, them, my brother, them, and so on. It's got to be definite. But we see in a lot of British context now, this thing about man, them, right? Man, them do this and man, them do that. So like, what that, right? So that's definitely alienating. That's uno, right? That's what that marks up. So we know where it's coming from, but man, them can work, right? Not in any English, because it will have to be the man, right? Because you can only the them pluralizer can only come when the noun is definite. So you get the man, them, my brother, them, my sister, them, and so on and so forth. But so you're getting evolution where in the metropole, because I'm told that Toronto has picked up the same man, them thing too. So you're getting in the metropoles and in the diaspora forms of language which are identified with the Caribbean, but which Caribbean people would view as a kind of deviation or distortion of the original. But language is dynamic. And therefore, the moment somebody opened their mouth and started talking about man, them, say, okay, that is English people, that thing, and so on. But it doesn't mean it's inferior, it just is different. Evolution is taking place, and we can now distinguish between Caribbean varieties and those that are in the diaspora by this particular man-them phenomenon. Okay.
I just want to say, just very quickly before we just take one or two more questions, that I feel very red, because I am coming from an environment, London, where a lot of our slang is very much borrowed from Jamaican Creole. And growing up in secondary school, that was the standard way we would speak. You would say man, them, and guys would say man's going to wherever, man's going to the chicken shop or whatever. So I feel it's so interesting listening to the evolution of languages. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people who speak the different Caribbean Creoles, if they came to the UK and they heard the way that a lot of Black British young people speak, which is clearly very heavily borrowed from Caribbean Creoles, they may well look at the way that we speak as a distortion of the original Caribbean Creole languages. So it's just really interesting to hear that. And I feel very red. I feel very, very.
No, it's evolution. It's evolution. You are who you are, and man them is who you are, and man them is as authentic to your experience as the man them is to mine. You understand? The key thing we have to understand is that it is an overall cultural. There's nothing to be read about. It is simply that with their subgroups, there's evolution taking place, and it's gone a particular way, and we as Caribbean-based people would laugh and say, "How did people get that?" But that's us being groupie. But objectively, man them belongs to a subcategory of Creole speakers, and the other set who will find that just belong to another subcategory. That's it. Nothing to be read about. Just be black.
Thank you, Professor. I think in the interest of time, as we're trying to wrap up, the last question is more about resources and more reading and information. So a couple of questions had come in. What document or book can I read about enslaved Surinamese Africans in Jamaica? And also any other sort of book recommendations. And another question earlier was where can we learn about, not only about the different languages, but learn how to speak the different languages? I don't know if you're able to provide us with some material.
Well, of course, the different I know that efforts are being made. They're certainly through the Jamaican language unit right now to develop a course in Jamaican as a foreign language. And so I would think in the next 6 months, via University of the West Indies and elsewhere, there will be a kind of formally recognized course in Jamaican as a foreign language. I know that it's possible in different in the US, for example, to do Haitian as a foreign language and so on. So that side of it is. Remind me the first part of the question again.
Sorry, bear with me. I have to find it. It was about.
Sorry about that.
Bear with me. It was particularly relating to a book. What document or book can I read about enslaved Surinamese Africans in Jamaica?
None that I know of. There are specific references to them. The closest I could get off the top of my head is that there's an article on that's called Maroon Spirit Language, how the older heads talk. And it's by somebody called Bilby, Kenneth Bilby. And it is in a publication called New West Indies Guide. And I think it's a 1981 article. And in it, he refers to the importation of Surinamese to Jamaica and the likely influence that had on what he called Maroon Spirit language, which is a special kind of English Creole that has a lot of Surinamese features in it. So that would be the article. Bilby also subsequently wrote a book that is called I forget the name, but it's a book on the Eastern Maroons of Jamaica and their traditions and language, and you will find reference to the Surinamese and the Maroon Spirit language in that book as well. So Bilby is the man to check, really, for reference to Suriname influence in Jamaican Creole, but particularly Surinamese influence in a special variety of Creole used by the Eastern Maroons of Jamaica. So that would be it. That would be the answer. Bilby, Kenneth Bilby, how the older heads talk. Right.
Thank you very, very much for that, Professor Devonish. Can we please just give Professor Devonish another round of applause just for giving such great detailed answers to all of the questions, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much. I just wanted to just say very quickly before I hand over to our amazing other team member, Isaac, I really love the idea of the Black Atlantic concept and just how different Black people from across the diaspora have borrowed from each other and are contributing to each other's cultures and languages in such a wonderful way. So thank you so much for explaining that to us. And it's so interesting for me as well, because I love dancehall and Afrobeats. And whenever I listen to these styles of music, hearing the different influences in the music. So thank you so much for giving us such a great explanation. I am now going to hand over to Isaac, who is going to just quickly chat to us about the end of the event, make a few comments, and let you know about future events as well. Is Isaac still here with us?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. I just want to thank everyone for coming to the event. First of all, it's been wonderful to have everyone with us. We'll be having a very exciting event coming. I believe it's, oh, Afia, can you remind me of the date, please?
Of course. So we have hopefully two events that we want to put on in November. So we're giving you two events in November. The first is going to be on Caribbean history, and we'll make some more announcements about that close to the time. Sorry, the first I think is going to be about natural hair in the Caribbean, and we'll make some more announcements about that close to the time. We've not got a date for that just yet. And the second event is going to be on Caribbean history, and that is going to be on the 28th of November. And again, we'll give you some more announcements about that close to the time, but we've got some real treats for you in November. And
yes, so please keep an eye out for the Eventbrite, because what we'll do is we'll make sure that everyone has been contacted who signed up to this event about the next ones, so you can get the first dibs on it and obviously let your family and friends know.
Great, thank you so much. Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. I was just going to remind everyone that we use Instagram, and you can find us at @Caribbean_links_group, which well, thank you, Stacey. We also have Twitter, so you can kind of keep abreast to everything that we're doing via those two channels, mostly for the next events. We'll advertise, we'll put up links, etc., so forth. So be sure to check that out.
Thank you, Marcia, for that. Well, the event is closed. The event is now over, but again, you'll be hearing from us next month. I just want to say very quickly